Empathy games came from a critical cultural moment, primarily anchored in the queer game design scene of the San Francisco Bay Area in the early 2010s, wherein designers used accessible game production software to create easily distributed and quickly consumed games online about their personal identity negotiations. Games such as Depression Quest, Dysphoria, and Mainichi gained a wide audience and often critical acclaim, but their popularity brought backlash and understandable criticism, even from the game's own creators. First, as Pozo notes, their popularity allowed straight, cisgender, and otherwise in-group members of the cultural majority to imagine they were closer to the lives of the game's creators than they truly were. And second, distribution online made these games circulate freely, limiting game creators' ability to get paid and control the spaces and contexts in which their work would be consumed. Empathy game creators responded by criticizing their own work, or at least how their games were consumed, removing their games from free platforms online, or even creating digital and physical exhibits that critiqued the idea that games could truly create empathy with culture's most disenfranchised groups. While I acknowledge those criticisms, I use Stone's theory of reparative game design as a launching point to describe how the very act of making games, not necessarily consuming or playing them, is the primary objective for empathy games. It is through the making of the empathy game where creators can find their benefit. My essay maps my experience designing the game Depersonal, a game about depersonalization through the lens of mental illness. My essay is organized around a series of 6 vignettes in which I not only critically engage with my experience, but I also put that experience in conversation with theory and other literature. I do not have time to adequately cover all 6 vignettes in this presentation, so I will simply talk to you about my first vignette, the part of my paper where I describe the creation of the game, and if it piques your interest, I will gladly send you the full copy of the paper. I became interested in how video games interactively portray mental illness after playing 2 games that prominently feature it: What Remains of Edith Finch from 2017 and Doki Doki Literature Club, also from 2017. I became curious as to how games use interactive, game-centric approaches to portray mental illness, and after choosing a third case study for the project, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice from also 2017, I went about playing the games and taking notes on my observations. After completing that project, I began forming an idea of a game depicting my own experience with mental illness. Popular media, including video games, showcase harmful tropes and often misinform audiences and public policy. Both entertainment media and news media portray mental illness as dangerous, whereas positive representations are practically non-existent. And video games have likewise been observed to offer significant mental illness themes, even though the nature of these depictions have not been fully articulated. Stewart finds that media portrayals of mental illness are overwhelmingly negative, and these negative representations can lead to reduced self-esteem, help-seeking behaviors, medication adherence, and recovery. Put simply, these portrayals have dramatic, real-world consequences. And Stewart calls for researchers to attempt the more challenging prospect of how to use media to improve the life chances and recovery possibilities for the 1 in 4 people who live with a mental disorder. Writers, researchers, and content creators are responsible for finding more innovative methods of portraying mental illness. And there is hope that improved and increased representations of mental illness can change the current cultural disposition to view it as something to be feared. There are better and worse ways to portray mental illness in games, and I wanted my game's portrayal to be honest regarding my own lived experience while building on what researchers have found to be beneficial. There has been some work describing how games portray mental illness, particularly through case studies of individual game characters, but these games often rely on the common trope of hallucinations and horror, often caused by post-traumatic stress disorder in military characters. Games that improve understandings of mental illness take a more empathetic and purposeful route. Hoffman finds that players who engaged with depression-themed games became more empathetic for people with depression, became exposed to more clinical discussions of depression, and had increased opportunities to talk to family and friends about depression. Following Stewart's call to articulate improved portrayals of mental illness, instead of incessant content analyses finding all too expected results, and emboldened by the evidence that attitudes regarding mental illness improve with education regarding it, I began the design process for what would become Depersonal. Depersonal is about my experience with depersonalization. I must offer a caveat here. I have not been diagnosed with a mental illness, but I have experienced depersonalization throughout my entire life, which can be described as having the feeling that you're observing yourself from the outside of your body, or have a sense that things around you aren't real, or both. Feelings of depersonalization can be very disturbing and may feel like you're living in a dream. I have suffered terrifying episodes of depersonalization since I was a child, lasting anywhere from a few seconds to several minutes, and these episodes would occur quite regularly. In adulthood, I experience a depersonalization episode approximately every month, and it happens more often when I am overtly thinking about it, such as when writing this essay. The terror of an episode is difficult to describe, but it is existential in nature and harrowing to the point of anxiety. It was not until I was past 30 years old when I discovered I was not the only one to have experienced this phenomenon, and that it had a name: depersonalization derealization disorder. However, for depersonalization to become a disorder, a person must experience the sensation persistently, and thus I have not been formally diagnosed, nor have I sought treatment. At the time I decided to create a game about depersonalization, I was no stranger to independent game design, having already designed and published 8 games online for free. Development went quickly, lasting only several months, and in October 2018 I published Depersonal on my website. The game requires only a few minutes to complete, and it follows the life of a nameless male character as he wakes up, eats, commutes to work, returns home, and goes to bed over the course of 3 days. The color palette consists of various shades of gray, except for the character and several other elements of the game that vibrantly vibrate in a rotating spectrum of color. Instructions on the bottom of the screen inform the player where to click to progress through each day. However, to depict an episode of depersonalization, at random intervals, a large dark figure appears that covers the game screen while colorful, static-laden squares fill up the game space. Chaotic, echoey language with static white noise floods the sound channels. At this time, an anxiety meter begins filling, and the player must click on the squares quickly to disperse them before the meter completely fills and the game ends. On day 1, the squares stay in place, making it a relatively easy task. On day 2, the squares begin to move slowly in random directions, and on day 3, the squares move quite rapidly. If the player fails to remove all of the squares before the anxiety meter fills completely, the screen goes black and the words "I don't feel like myself" appear before the game restarts. If the player completes all 3 days successfully, the following message appears: "Sometimes I don't feel like myself, like I'm playing a video game of my life. I'm inside of myself, watching everything else." Thank you for listening to the first vignette in my essay. If you're interested in reading the rest of my autoethnography, feel free to contact me and I will gladly send you my essay. Thank you for your time.